Hey everyone, I'm going to talk to you today about the HP 290. If you've been on the Discord, which I highly recommend you join, you've heard me talking about this. There's a thread up on the forums. I think it's got over 100 posts in it now. And this is a very cool little box. From a normal perspective, there's nothing remarkable about it. But I'm going to tell you, I'm converting everything to HP 290s. My pfSense, all of my virtual machines, they're getting moved to 290s. Sonar, radar, all of the services that I run, Plex runs great on it. Even transcoding, it can do 21 transcodes on a very, very low power Celeron. The box in itself is nothing special. However, the pricing and the way it kind of fits into my setup and most setups easily, it's pretty attractive. And just reading over my own notes on the thread here, the box comes with a Intel Celeron G4900, 2 cores with no hyperthreading, 3.2 gigahertz maximum clock. I don't think it has boost, but it does support AES-NI for hardware crypto support for pfSense. It has an 8th gen QuickSync iGPU. It comes with a 500 gig SATA 3.5 inch hard drive, which I pretty much put in a pile and don't use them. A DVD RW slim drive, again, don't really use it. It has 2 SATA ports on board, so one for each of those, but that's it. And a NVMe slot, which is not something you find in this price range like ever. And it's a M.2 2280. It can also accept 2242. It does not accept 2260 or 2230. Only those two sizes, 2280, 2242. And one thing to note about this NVMe slot is that it does not work at full 4x. It only works at 2x. Not a huge deal. Still way faster than a regular solid state. So don't be too worried about that. It has a Realtek Gig E NIC on board. Unfortunately, it's Realtek and not Intel. We can mitigate that by adding a 2 or 4 port Intel NIC for pfSense. It has AC Wi-Fi and Bluetooth 4.0. And it's got an 80 plus gold PSU, which is very, very surprising in this price range. It consumes about 17 watts idle in the BIOS. So presumably even less when we have the OS loaded, probably somewhere in the neighborhood of about 13 watts. And there's only one 80 mil fan, which is right on the CPU, and it's ducted in such a way that it passively draws air in through the case and then exhausts it out the back. I'll show you that. It supports 8th and 9th gen Intel processors, and it's a complete computer for about $120. And they say they're refurbished, but boy, do they look brand new. I have 8 of these. 7 of them came in perfect condition. One of them has the little antenna for the Wi-Fi ripped off, but is otherwise in perfect condition. You get a motherboard, CPU, a stick of RAM, a hard drive, and a 80 plus gold PSU for $120, which is insane. According to the motherboard specification sheet, it can support all the way up to i7 8th gen and i7 9th gen. I don't know about the i9, which why would you run an i9 in this? And I'm not sure if it can officially support the K unlocked processors. I doubt you could overclock them anyway. You're kind of limited to regular like i7 8700, i7 8700T, i5 8500, 8400, etc. If you're going to upgrade the processor in this, make sure to not get the F series processors, especially if you're going to be using it for QuickSync, because that means that you won't be able to use the onboard graphics, which means that you'd have to add a GPU, and there is not a lot of room for GPU in this thing. It's very tiny and it's low profile, so unless you've got that on hand, you're kind of SOL. It's relatively pointless to get an F series processor. So yeah, just don't do that. With the complete stock config, I'm only getting about 52 Celsius under full load, and it's quiet. I mean, it's damn quiet. I wouldn't be too concerned about these making too much noise and heat and using a lot of power, because they just won't. That's with the stock processor. And if you do processor upgrade, you're kind of be on your own there as far as heat, but it does support up to 65 watts of TDP. So I think you'll be fine ultimately. And just a couple of possible uses before I get too deep into opening it up and showing you the inside. You can use it for a small QuickSync Plex server. You can use it for a pfSense box, dedicated NZB unpack box, dedicated torrent seed box, a physical VM that you would normally run something virtualized on, and you just want a test box, and it's very easy to just get the hardware set up and deploy whatever you want to it. You can use multiple of them with like Docker Swarm. You can add 10 gig E. So if you do want to have that file transfer box, you can make it very fast with 10 gig E. And then you can actually make this into a NAS and DAS setup, which I know at least 2 people are doing on Discord, where they're using the one internal hard drive slot and then adding a 8-port external LSI controller and a DAS. So that would be 9 drives, presumably 1 parity, and then 8 data drives. So that would be a very, very small, lightweight setup. I actually have the materials to do it here. I don't have the 8E card, but I do have that little the mini DAS, the 8-bay mini DAS. I'm interested to see how those pan out. But yeah, those are some possible uses for the HP 290. I guess I will give you a overview of the external features. Bear with me. This thing is a little heavy, so I'll do my best with the camera work here. On the front, we have a very shiny but also somehow textured front plate. There's 2 USB 3.0 SD card reader. There's your power button, and then your headset combo jack, and that's about it. And this thing is about 2U high, by the way. The only vent is on the side here, and I'll show you where that leads. So that's your main intake, which will cool your hard drive and maybe the RAM a little bit and the CPU. And then on the back, not a whole lot to see. Here's your power supply. It's almost like SFX or I forget what that other small power supply size is. You have 2 low profile slots. One is X16 PCI Express, one's X1. A bunch of USB 3.0. There's your Realtek NIC, VGA, HDMI, and then rear sound. Like I said, it's pretty unremarkable from a on paper features standpoint. It doesn't seem like there's a lot going on here, but really the idea is that it's a cheap way to get really modern hardware and get a desktop socket and then run a power efficient system. And it gives you enough flexibility with the onboard NVMe support, PCI Express, and things like that, where if you're a little creative, you can use it in a lot of cool ways. To get into the case itself, there's that one thumb screw right at the top there. Once you've undone that screw, pull rearward on the side panel and it will come off. All right, so I've set the side panel aside, and here's what the inside looks like. At the very front, right here, is where the hard drive sits, and you can see the cables poking out down here. The optical drive is sitting right below that, and that's pretty much all you can see. There's a power supply in the bottom, and then in the top is the CPU area with that 80 millimeter fan, a little bit of ducting around it to guide the air. So basically the air intakes through the side panel, across this hard drive, down over the CPU fan, and gets exhausted out the back here through that ducting. And it seems to work pretty well. They've done a good job of engineering this little system to keep it cool. I've had no cooling issues whatsoever, and I didn't even have to replace the stock thermal paste as I normally do with GC Extreme. But if you were to replace the processor, I would probably recommend upgrading the fan to an Arctic P8 PWM and upgrading the thermal paste to G-Lid GC Extreme. Now, to get into the rest of the case, because we haven't shown off where the NVMe slot is, we have to remove the entire front section where this hard drive is. Getting into the case is not the easiest thing to do on camera, but I'll do my best. Basically, we have to pull this front panel off to get to the rest of the motherboard, and if we want to change the RAM, or if we want to change the hard drive or add an NVMe drive, we have to pull this front panel off. It's not too hard. Once you've done it once, you'll be like, okay, that's not a big deal. I've done it now 6 times, so I will do my best to do it here on camera for you, but if it doesn't all come through, I'm sure you can figure it out. Basically, the thing that's preventing this front panel from coming off, there's 2 things. There's 4 clips on the top, but also the optical disk drive is holding it in. We're gonna slide out the optical disk drive just a little bit. There's 1 tab that holds it in, And you can leave it plugged in to do this. You can see the tab. It is right here, this little tab that I'm kind of nestling my finger into. You need to push this and sort of push the optical drive out the front a little bit to see it's come out. Okay, once you've done that, you can detach these 4 clips gently and pull the front panel off towards you. The problem with pulling this front panel off is that it's still attached to the case via wires. So be very careful as you're pulling this off, because you don't want to pull those wires out. You don't want to break them. You can just sort of pull the optical drive out a little bit, and once you've got this off, we need to go about that far with the front panel. So I flipped it around here for you, and you can see that the front panel is still attached via that wire. We don't need to take it off any further than this to detach the front panel and the hard drive assembly. Next, we need to remove 3 Torx screws. I don't know exactly what Torx size they are off the top of my head, but there's 3 of them. There's one here, and there's one on the other side, and then there's one right by the hard drive tray right here. So if you remove those 3, you can pull the whole front the front section of the case away from the case, and I will do that very quickly. All right, so now that you've got the front panel removed, you'll notice that the hard drive caddy portion is still semi-attached to the case because we've got the optical disk drive wires here. But really all you need to do is just detach it, and then you have about this much room to work with. In the very top, right where my finger is the Wi-Fi card. If you forget to buy a NVMe screw, or you don't have one, you can use the one from this and then just take the Wi-Fi card out. A lot of people have been doing that. The NVMe slot is right next to it, and as you can see, it only has 2 standoffs for 2242 or 2280 size, and then there's 2 DIMM slots, one of which is occupied by a 4 gig DIMM. Removing the hard drive now is even easier because we've moved the caddy out of the way of the CPU, so it's just 4 screws, and you'll see them right as soon as you open the case, really. And then you just remove those 4 screws, unplug it, and then you can slide the hard drive out. The hard drives you'll find in these are just your generic desktop crap, basically. This one happens to be a Seagate, but I've gotten WD Blues, I've gotten Toshibas. I think they just use whatever is around, whatever they can find. But it's just a 500 gig, so really not worth much to anyone. But yeah, there it is. So for the ease of the next part of the video here, I'm going to remove a lot of the wiring so I can show you this without the hard drive cage hanging off the front, but you really don't need to do this, so I don't recommend doing this. So this is what it looks like with the entire front panel removed. As you can see, there's 2 SATA ports there. Right there is your M.2 Wi-Fi, it's 2230. Notice that there's only 1 antenna connector, so if you do replace the Wi-Fi card or you want to upgrade, just know that there's only 1 internal antenna connector. Now, the part that most people haven't done is removing this CPU shroud area. It's super simple. The first thing you have to do is get this yellow wire out of the way. And this is your 4-pin CPU connector. It's just held in by some clips. Just start at the bottom and work your way around and fish the wire out from underneath. Once you've got the wire like this, you can leave the wire plugged in. I'm just going to tuck it behind here. Now, the shroud is held in by these tabs. There's one here, and there's one on the bottom. Once you release the tabs, the shroud comes right up off of the CPU, just like this, and you kind of have to wiggle it to get it out from underneath. And then you've got your standard looking heatsink. It uses the same screws for the hard drive, those Torx screws, and there's 4 of them. You can replace your fan if you want to put that Arctic P8 PWM fan on there. If you want to replace your CPU, you've got to get at least this far, pull the heatsink off, and replace your CPU. It's just a regular desktop socket underneath. You can use basically any CPU. I'm pretty partial to the stock CPU, the Celeron G4900. It's pretty good at most home lab tasks, a lot better than most people would think. It's low power. It has a similar quick sync chip to a lot of the larger CPUs. So again, we're able to do 21 1080p transcodes with quick sync and hardware transcoding and Plex on this box in completely stock config. except for the SSD. The Pentium Golds are also great. A lot of people are turned off by the Celeron and Pentium names, but they really aren't what they used to be. The 8th gen and 9th gen Celerons and Pentiums are very, very fast. And not only that, but the new Pentiums are actually 2-core with 4 threads, like the old 7th gen and older i3s. They've done a little bit of a shift in naming. So if you liked the old 7th gen i3 or 6th gen i3, the new Pentiums are actually the same or faster. The new i3s are basically old i5s. They're outgoing i5s because the new i3s are quad-core with no hyperthreading. So that's very cool. And then, of course, when you get into the i5 and the i7, you're looking at 6 cores and with or without hyperthreading. And in the case of the i7 9700, you're looking at 8 cores with no hyperthreading. I like that quite a lot. Not really a whole lot else to say about this little HP box. I actually forgot to mention that I'm using one for my home theater PC upstairs. I put a low-profile GT 1030 with HDMI 2.0. It is absolutely stellar at 4K HDR playback. I really like it there as well. Really, I just want to say that I'm happy that new and modern hardware is starting to come down in price even more. And no, this isn't going to replace the high core count and high thread count Xeon CPUs. They have their place too. But if you're just doing something like hardware transcoding with Plex, put it on its own box like this thing. It's $120. Add a SSD for $30 and you're at $150. It can do a ton of transcodes and only use about 30 or 40 watts while doing it. So if that process of transcoding isn't taking place on your CPU cores on your server, it's taking place on this little box, that's free performance you've just gained. There's ways to think about it in terms of hardware upgrades, but you can also, quote, upgrade your server by reducing the load on it. That's just something to consider as well. If you've got any questions about this HP box, please leave a comment either here or in the HP owners thread. I will link the HP owners thread below. It has pretty much everything you need to learn about this box. It has all the documentation, all of the related guides, such as the hardware transcoding guide. It also has the Mini ITX PF Sense build listed, HP's official documentation, how to enable Wake on LAN, other people's experiences, and everything. Everything's in there. So go check that out. I think you'd be really surprised what this thing can do. This is going to be a longer project as far as showing off what QuickSync can do. You can either experience it for yourself with one of these or another system similar to that. Please read the guide first. I've outlined some very, very important things to consider in that guide, especially choosing the correct hardware, when to use it, when not to use it, what software to use along with it. So please read the guide before you make that move. Ultimately, I'm going to be doing some testing between 7th, 8th, and 9th generation, as well as the different iGPUs that exist within those generations, and comparing it to a Quadro P2000, because everyone seems to love that thing. And in my experience, QuickSync just absolutely destroys it. I'm eager to do that, especially showing off quality and the differences in file types and output resolution, things like that. That is going to be a much longer project. For now, this is the HP 290. It's a great little addition to anyone's home lab. I think you should check it out because they are very cheap and very upgradable. So to all of you that already have one, and you know that I have quite a few, enjoy your HP 290. Please post about your experiences with them in the thread, and I will see you guys next time. Peace.